Hello and welcome to NAMM Believe in Music Week 2021. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Josh Maichele. I'm the Applications Manager for House of Worship at L-Acoustics. Today we're going to have Brian Victor from River Pointe Church in Houston, Texas, John Cornelius from Orchard Hills Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and David Mendoza, who was with us last year actually as well in person from Mount Paran Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Today we're going to talk to all three of these gentlemen about their recent L-ISA installations in their churches. We're going to talk about what drove the decision to actually go L-ISA for them, how leadership and the congregation has responded to the L-ISA installation, and how they've used it day to day. Ultimately, how easy is it to use? How easy has it been to mix on? Things like that. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Well, welcome, gentlemen. We really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your week. Hopefully you guys had a great Christmas and New Year. But we wanted to talk a little bit about your systems and what you guys have going on at your church. But I think before we do that, I'd like to know a little bit about each of you. And if we could start with Brian, you guys could just tell me a little bit about who you are, the church that you serve or that you work at, and that kind of stuff. That would be awesome.
Sure. My name is Brian Victor. I'm the Technical Operations Director Global for several campuses, all the campuses at River Pointe Church in the Richmond area of Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. We've got campuses in downtown, kind of the midtown area, and over in Missouri City, and then Richmond is our main campus.
Good. Awesome. My name is David Mendoza. I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the Productions Director for Mount Paran Church here in Atlanta, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And yeah, I'm John Cornelius, Orchard Hills Church in the north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the technical director there. I look over the AVL systems for several of our campuses. So.
Great, guys. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves into our audience at NAMM here. So I think one of the really important things that I want to talk about, and I think that people need to know more about when it comes to L-ISA, is really what was the driving force. And for each one of your churches, because I got to be involved with all three of your churches, both in the demo, design, implementation, and for services, but each one of your churches really had a different reason for going with L-ISA, and I think, David, we've talked a little bit about this last year when you were with us at NAMM directly, but maybe we'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what drove L-ISA for your church, and I think we'll kind of talk amongst ourselves together about what drove that for both Brian and John's church as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So like every church in America, our system begins to get old. So our original system was aging and it was time to update. We were running into a lot of issues as we were driving this. We have a very open, wide room. That's your amphitheater style. And we were running into a lot of sightline issues. So what actually drove the conversation here and the reason we went to L-ISA was due to sightlines. We had previously installed some massive Jesus iPads, these LED walls, and they're huge. They're beautiful. They look great. They're eye candy. But we had issues running audio into video where if we hung a traditional, left, right, center, or if we did any kind of configuration with J-hangs, we would be in big problems because they would be in the center of the screens at certain viewing angles. So that's what really drove us to immersive. We originally weren't interested in the immersive aspect of it. We just wanted a left-right system. But by the demo and by the introduction to what is the immersive system, we were blown away. And so I think that was just this massive bonus that we received once we headed that way.
Yeah, and for you guys, David, if I recall, a lot of the conversations were not really about the technology early on. They were really about the aesthetic goals that achieve for us. And I think universally between all three of us, or all three of you guys' churches, there was an aesthetic application that obviously served one way or another. John, I think the story of how you guys got here, because you kind of went through the proper channel of, or the more, I guess, reproducible channel that we have right now in terms of demo, out in Westlake and everything. So tell us a little bit about kind of your process and what drove L-ISA for you.
Yeah, so for us, we did a complete and total auditorium remodel with all three systems, being gutted, starting from scratch, almost like a new room, but with an existing room. I come from having a very theatrical space. It's a 1,000-seat auditorium with a 250-seat balcony. Was done by a theater architect, so it very much felt like that. Our biggest goal through the whole project was to create focus downstage center. That was one of the biggest overarching goals, both architecturally, how we designed the walls, the LED, pretty much everything, but then going down the road of, regular traditional left-right array. As that design with the traditional left-right array matured, got introduced to L-ISA, got to be able to go out for the demo out there in California about this time last year, and then learned what L-ISA could do, and then realized that one of the things that was exciting for me was basically that all this stuff that we were doing visually and architecturally to create focus center could also be magnified by what L-ISA could do, especially even with the spoken word, that we could make it feel so incredibly focused to the middle was a very exciting thing. And then, of course, the creativity that it affords musically is, of course, exciting and wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brian, I think for River Pointe, this was an interesting situation for you guys because actually we met at a proper, really left-right stereo demo of L-Acoustics products in another manufacturer. So talk a little bit about you guys' process and maybe the inclusion of iDebris in that and how we ended up where we did.
Yeah, so we had a system that was 15 years old, was very, very long in the tooth, traditional array, J-hang, and then some fills between it. And it just didn't sound good anymore. It needed to be replaced. And went down the road with adebris because we had done previous work with them, and leadership was really comfortable with that. So basically kind of narrowed it down. We were actually looking, we're in a fan-shaped room. We got 1,500 seats roughly. It's actually a pretty wide fan, and we're flanked by a couple of rear projection screens that are pretty large on the outsides. And so there were some sightline issues. And because of that, we were looking for creative options in the left-right hang idea, and even doing like a right-left, just to make sure that we were previously a mono system and trying to get to a stereo setup somewhere in the process. And so we were doing, we did a demo with another manufacturer and L-Acoustics, and it was pretty apparent who was winning that demo just from a sonic quality and transparency and intelligibility standpoint. The other manufacturer is great, but just wasn't able to compete. But one of the really interesting things that happened in our demo, at the end of our demo, our lead pastor made a comment about kind of this frustration over time with the inability to focus people's attention to the center where he's speaking, while they're looking at the IMAG on the left and right that's so large. And then, his concern was, we're going to have are we going to have this really big sound coming at you while I'm trying to speak? And I think, Josh, you and I both probably at that same moment had an, we're in some trouble now, because what was being designed and been proposed would have been a wall of sound.
Right.
It would have been left-right, but it would have appeared to be a wall of sound. And so we both kind of came to each other quickly and with the same consensus that, hey, there's a problem here and we need to try and address it. And you brought up the idea of the L-ISA rig, which we had actually dismissed initially, just because we are on an older console, didn't see all the value in trying to integrate kind of new with the old and some of the control issues that can exist with that. But you had some great ideas in terms of ways that we could overcome that. And primarily because of that need to create a focused center, much like John was explaining a second ago, and to create a more intimate vibe in the room. 1,500 seats, but you want to make sure that when the lead pastor is speaking or someone's speaking, that you really hone in on that center, that's point from where they're speaking or wherever on the stage they're speaking. And so that was really the impetus. And that began a very quick, amazingly quick turnaround between our integrator, our designer, and L-Acoustics to basically quickly flip to the L-ISA rig, get that approved, and get it installed. And we've only been installed for a few weeks before Christmas, to be honest. And so it was a remarkable transformation once that happened, but it was also remarkably tight in the timeline. And both LD Systems and Adibri are to be applauded for their efforts to try and overcome some of the issues that existed in quickly flipping this thing around. And we've been really pleased.
Awesome. Yeah. So we talk a lot about these systems, the L-ISA systems what I think the industry has done is put every bit of this in this immersive category. And I think Infocom or something like that, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we made a joke that it was like the year of immersive audio. But that's not going away. But we've been kind of lumped, or L-ISA has been kind of lumped with all of the other multi-channel mixing solutions out there, I'll say. But you guys, David and I have talked about this a lot over the past time since he's had his system, and both John and Brian, you both touched on something there, which is about the connection and connecting to that downstage center where maybe our worship leader is or where pastor is. And so when we start to look at this object-oriented mixing, one of the things that Pastor said, Brian, at your church that really made me feel like, hey, I think this is the right application for them. He said, I'm just having a really hard time understanding how are we going to connect what's happening on stage and where we're hearing it from. And so sometimes I like to have this preface to talk about that immersive audio is a very wide category right now. But what we're doing with L-ISA is really, you now get to be an artist behind the console again, but at its root, and I think one of the most powerful things that L-ISA does is connect what we're seeing with what we're hearing. And so I kind of leave it open to you guys. I'd love to have you kind of speak into that a little bit of what your sense has been, both from a worship and a speaking standpoint of either, is it connecting the congregation in a deeper or a better way with pastor when they're speaking? What is it doing for worship for you? And what is the general feeling, when you walk the room or you move places in the room, things like that? Because those are things, Brian, you and I have talked about and walked the room together multiple times. I'll just open it up to you guys if somebody wants to chime in and kind of speak into that a bit.
Yeah, I'd like to take the lead there. We had a little background about, my church. We have a 250-piece choir. So there's 250 members in our choir. And, me and Josh talked about this, for a long time in our worship scenario, it felt like there was the praise band, the rhythm section, and then the choir in the background. And how do we mesh this? How do we make it sound together? How do we bring this as one harmony? Like, how do we mesh them together? And that's, for me, L-ISA has been that secret sauce of understanding what the room is supposed to be feeling like, at the same time adding the ounce of choir that makes the room feel like the room is singing when not necessarily the room isn't singing. And now we talk about today. I mean, January 4th, 2021, with the COVID restrictions, with all these other areas that we're dealing with. I mean, I had a member come up to me yesterday and say, our room isn't able to have, we're 2,500 seater, and we're able to have about 1,000 people in our room. And he came to me and said, how are you guys getting it to sound like there's 2,500 people in here? Like, I just don't understand. Like, there's something weird happening in the background. Like, I'm not, he's like, I'm not dumb. I know you guys are piping stuff in. And I said, no, like, we have the reverb engine within the L-ISA that lets us give this massive sound while still giving you this comfortable, fine-tuned vocal. But up here, like, we're in a packed house and it's still happening for us. So that's been the biggest secret between, the connection from the people. I told Josh this, our first, month or two of having the system, people would like to stay over for worship. I mean, we were having our worship set and then, the back wall of the sanctuary was filled again. We were like, these are the same people that were here for the first service. Why are they still here? Yeah. Like, we're on service number 2. We're moving on. And no, they wanted to experience it again because they felt like it was a piece of heaven is what I was told. It just feels so amazing in here. And we're so blessed to have this. And that was the immediate reaction we received in the congregation. So being able to tie, like you said, pastors feeling about it with the worship team's feeling about it to it's a perfect relationship across the board where everybody is feeling the impact of a system, which in my perspective, I don't think I would be able to capture that with a left-right.
Right.
It's very hard to make up what that feeling is, like what you're experiencing with the timing, with the reverb engine, with everything that you're putting your fingers to. You can't necessarily translate that to a left-right. It's different.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brian, I think, you'll have some interesting thought here on this, because during one of the first, I think, soft launch weekends for you guys, we actually lost power there and ended up mixing part of the service on left-right because we went into fallback and then we went back. So maybe talk a little bit, for you guys on what that's been like.
We were shut down because of the restrictions. And so we took the opportunity during that time to explore this and put the system in that we were going to put in, and realized it would be a really advantageous opportunity to do that while no one was in the room. One of the downsides to that was no one remembered what the old system sounded like. and so, because it had been since March, and we basically opened up our main campus in December, on the first weekend of December. And so that was our first kind of soft launch was the weekend before that, with volunteers and everything. And we had a power outage, like just campus wide. The whole grid went down. And so all of a sudden, system flips into fallback mode, and it was remarkable in a bad way. I mean, it was good. We could still hear everything. Everything was still great, but how much all of a sudden going back to a left-right scenario, because our fallback is set up to kind of really be a left-right system at that point. And all of a sudden, all of this space in the mix, this width in the mix, was just narrowed down and focused in these two hangs, and it sounded small. It sounded really small, really fast.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of cool, because it was when no one had been able to hear anything for a long time, all of a sudden this was a great opportunity for them to suddenly hear again what it could have sounded like or should have sounded like,
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards the takeaway from everybody involved was that was pretty awesome. Number one, that it worked, but also how different it sounds. And it's not that it's bad in the left and right, but for us, that decision to go with the L-ISA route was really focused singularly and with the biggest priority on the spoken word.
Yep.
And so in our conversations, Josh, we were kind of like, if we can nail that, if we can succeed in that aspect alone, this is a win. We will have succeeded in putting in the right system. And even if we treat it more traditionally afterwards for music and everything, if we can create that intimacy and focus of attention and get people to stop noticing the system, right, for, as much as it's great, but ideally we'd like them to really stop paying attention to that. And also hopefully maybe in the process, stop noticing the iMag screens and all that, and maybe help to draw their attention where the actual speech is coming from that center. And so when we explored through mixing and rehearsals and everything, starting to bring things out. And so I didn't think we had gone very far down that road in terms of with the actual worship or immersive, from that, word,
yep,
or verbiage. But what was amazing to me was, again, when we got shut down to the fallback, when the power went out, and suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, this is remarkable what this thing is doing when it's working, right? Yeah. And it wasn't Elisa's fault, obviously, and also great to know that we've got a backup that really does work, and can pull through if that ever happens again and when it happens again.
Right, certainly. And John, how about you? I mean, your system went online. Actually, I was in Houston, then in Pittsburgh, then back in Houston. So you guys went on about the same time, but you've had the Christmas season and stuff. And I got to mix, I think, your inauguration service with you guys there, where I think we had 8 or 10 vocalists and everything. So what has this been like for you guys?
It's been wonderful, but and I still feel like I'm a baby on this and still trying to get my feet figuring out how it goes. But I would say back to the when you were there, you actually helped me point this out, and then I spent the whole month past watching this. it really has made a big difference in the spoken word. While we do have two, 18-foot wide LED screens on the side, when it's come to pastor being on stage, where it used to be everyone was kind of, craning their neck to the other side, or, people were generally watching the screens in our old scenario. More than half the people at this point are watching the pastor live, or, so that only, in my mind, is achieved by what L-ISA's doing there. And, making that feel so central has not, it just helps people, draws people's eyes to the center. And that's been wonderful and very exciting, since, it's something I was kind of saying it's how this is going to be cool. And then for it to actually turn out has been great. And I'd say the other part is, like you pointed out, both our opening weekend and then our Christmas season, we had eight to 10 people, vocalists on stage. And I would just say, for coming from a pretty bad point source system before that, having that many vocals on stage, it was pretty hard to find space for them in the mix. It's kind of hard to make them all gel, help make them feel big, but also have space. And now with L-ISA, it couldn't be easier. Everyone kind of has their own space. When it's just a single vocal, it feels really great and huge. But then when, especially with using some of the techniques you showed me to, kind of pull things out into the sides a little bit, and using the depth of the room engine, just when it goes from that single vocal to like a big choir feel, it just explodes. And it's been noticed by the congregation. People have been really excited about how things have sounded, and have pointed out that they can feel, even sitting off this one guy who I never had met before, but he came up to me all excited. He had sat in the far right, someone who would have basically only heard the right side of a traditional left-right setup, and came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm a musician, go to another church, just stop by. Really appreciated he said mixing the stereo." Obviously, he didn't have the vocabulary to say what he had just experienced, but it definitely being sitting so far off to the side, but could feel imaging. And at least, I guess, worked out pretty well, especially in our space. It was well suited. I think we have about 80% that's in the zone, which is wonderful. But yeah, this guy definitely noticed it, made a big deal to come and point out to me, and was pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. I think something for the people who are watching this and are going to listen to this later to know is, so for all three of your churches, you really have very drastically different churches, from really what maybe your goal in the community and your church's goals are, but what your worship teams look like, what your pastors, driving forces were, and all that kind of stuff. At least from my standpoint, being able to sit back and know all three of you and know your churches quite well, very, very diverse category of churches here between you three. What I think is also interesting is you have a wide range of how this is working for you guys, from David, who's on a Digico SD12, and he's running full desk link with control to the L-ISA processor, to John, who's on an Avid S6L and has the plug-in capability, to Brian, where they're currently on a VI6, and the entire workflow right now relies on the L-ISA controller. So can you guys talk a little bit about mixing? Was it daunting walking up to it? Do you think it's harder or easier to mix on from the get-go than a stereo system, and that kind of stuff? So maybe John, if you want to kind of jump in, because you've had, you're kind of in the middle with that, with having the plug-in, but also you being able to recall presets and things like that. So what has mixing looked like for you?
I would say it was I guess I spent a whole year kind of fantasizing on how this would work out. Wasn't sure how it would or wouldn't, but it has been, I would say it's been easy, easier than I expected. And I guess even going back to, I would say, the vocalist thing for me, oftentimes on a normal week, we have 3 to 4 or 5 vocalists, but on holiday time stuff we will expand it to 8 or 10. And coming from I had a very, not so great point source system, it was very difficult to even mix that, to even hear like, okay, who's sticking out? It was even hard to identify that. So even without having to use much EQ compression or anything drastically exciting from a mixing perspective, just with what the L-ISA system could do to space those people out, to give those people space, and in the mix, it was just so much easier to, for me, immediately to just kind of like, oh, I can hear that person over there. Oh, they feel that they need to be louder. Oh, they need to be softer. That was just so much more easily done. And I would say probably the easiest or biggest thing that quickly changed, I would say, how I felt comfortable. I felt comfortable immediately because of that, because it was easier to pick out things. It was easier to find, oh, that thing isn't hanging, or that guitar isn't hanging. Oh, now I can find a space for it. Now I can push it up in level, pull it back in level, push it back in the room. All of those things make it so much easier to achieve mixed goals that I've always had that, were just difficult on my old system.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian, how about you guys? What's your being on what may be the most rudimentary version of this, but we put the touchscreen right in front of the console, so we have easy access to it. How has the user interface of the L-ISA controller and the workflow worked for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, remarkably well. We were originally sort of, again, thinking that if we had to, we'd treat everything else except for the spoken word more traditionally. But we found that putting the touchscreen for us right in front of the console, right above the bridge, it's super easy to recall snapshots from that. It's super easy and intuitive to find the things we need. We kept everything kind of one-to-one from the desk to the L-ISA controller and processor, and so it makes it pretty easy to do that. And then one of the amazing things about it is that in our scenario, we've got about 74 or so % that's got what's considered the immersive coverage, the L-ISA coverage. We've got outfills on the side, and the outfills are seamless to the L-ISA. The way the L-ISA processor is down mixing that and basically handling that, you still get this amazing imaging, which I totally didn't expect to have at all. I thought we would be sacrificing that, and that was okay with me. But what a bonus in our case that when we discovered that, everything still translates. I mean, it's pretty hard not to find a seat in the room that it's not translating between the front lip fills and the side fills on the out. It's pretty amazing. And from a workflow standpoint, it's been pretty simple. It's been pretty easy and a lot easier than we expected it to be. So,
awesome. Now, and so Brian touched on something, David. I think, obviously tell us a bit about what it's like to mix on the ST12 with the desk link and stuff, but also you probably have the smallest L-ISA zone of the three churches here. I think John's church at Orchard Hills was in excess of 80%. We were right around that 70% mark at River Pointe, and we're in the like 50-55 range at Mount Paran, and we were a little worried about that. So talk a bit about what the experience has been like in the balcony, in areas where the main PA is even reaching us, and we're in delays there, or those under balconies that we have, and things like that as well.
Yeah. So I mean, like you said, our original system was a stereo system with a mono ring across the top balcony. We had city limits that shortened our roof height from the original construction to about 16 feet. So the roof height to the top of the balcony is very tight. We're in the heart of the city of Atlanta, so that they trimmed us down. But that was our big worry. Was my question to Josh, what's going to happen when I walk out of the scene system, which is the original, the L-ISA experience? What's going to happen? How does it translate? And it's incredible. I mean, not only the ability to not hear a disconnect between when you're walking outside of the scene system into the delays, but then the ability of intellectually be able to understand what's happening. Like it's in sequence. It makes sense. You walk across the room, or you walk out to the monofills, they have about the same experience when you would in the center. One other thing that I would love to mention, touching to Brian's point, is our hallway feeds are off the L-ISA system, which is incredible. I A/B'd them, your standard matrix mix off the console, and then your L-ISA feed, your mono back feed from L-ISA processor, that goes straight to QSys and goes out to the hallways. And it is remarkable. You talk about so many terms, the low end effect, the more the space that you have, the louder I'm able to turn them up. Like there's just so many benefits that you don't think about until you're in that scenario. What would it sound like? Wow, this is incredible. So it's just been a big blessing. And the experience for me, my biggest worry, jumping to this immersive system, is our service isn't really heavily programmed. We have professional musicians and close to professional vocalists that, first take kind of people that show up. They need a 10-minute rehearsal 15-minute rehearsal and they're going, let's do this.
Right.
So my worry was, Josh, we don't get a lot of rehearsal time. The biggest rehearsal time for us is just to make sure everything's in order and maybe run through the verse and the chorus and let's go. Because we have a choir, because we have so many parts, my biggest worry was, how am I supposed to jump on this console and be able to get up and run? Like how quickly can I jump on the L-ISA processor on the system and understand my way through it? And it is incredibly easy to navigate it. Once you wrap your mind around what you're working with, as far as what the immersive room is, what it means, what are the parameters, you have stuff like distance, you have width, you have elevation, you have all these parameters that you're given. Once you understand what they do and what they mean, it's game time from there. I mean, now the paintbrush is in your hand as a mixer, and you're painting the portrait here. According to your jury, how's the mix handled? There were so many questions that came up. Another thing that came up was the dB level. For the long time, my church struggled with, it's too loud. It's way too loud. Why is it so loud? And because we were trying to make this energy out of a system that could not provide that energy, we were getting really shrill, really, really quickly. And so it's incredible. And I told Josh this as well. I was like, Josh, it's been months since we talked about the dB level in the room. Like, it just hit me like nobody's come up. It's weird. Like I haven't had any complaints. Like, it's incredible because people are now, there's an energy aspect to this PA that gives us the ability to provide a high intensity energy without having to, throw it up to 105. You get this concert sound at a certain level where it's like, this is amazing alone. Like, I don't need to ride this so much more because it just feels great. It's intelligible. I can understand everything. Even when we talk about a single source input, like Pastor's mic, the intelligibility and the drive behind this PA is incredible to where everybody in the room is able to understand him at a certain dB level. And you weren't able to get that with the system that I was on prior. It was impossible. Intelligibility was tremendously weak. I mean, there's just so many aspects that we really were blessed with that, like you said, the congregation doesn't really understand how to put it, but they just say, wow, it just sounds amazing. Well, what do you hear? It's incredible. Like, I can't necessarily tell you what I'm hearing, but it's incredible. And that's the feeling we get from our congregation is, man, this is such a blessing. We're so blessed. We're blessed by it.
And John, I see you, especially when Dave was talking about the stereo mix down from L-ISA, and you're kind of shaking your head, and so I think maybe you have some thoughts on that. Are you guys utilizing that as well?
Yeah, we've been. I've been doing a stereo down mix, or taking that and experimenting with that, added some room mics to it and stuff like that. But that's been great. Everything that I do in the room has overwhelmingly just worked, even on the down mix. So that part has been way better than expected and easy. And then actually back to the volume thing, I was excited about that too, because for a long time we struggled against everyone. Most people complained it was too loud, but we had a system that, we were trying to get a certain amount of impact from that just never had it. So it just got harsh or shrill or strident. And then, from moment one, I felt like it's been plenty loud. It's, by the numbers, it's way louder than we've ever been doing. And up to this point, no complaints. I've gone a month on it and haven't been asked to, pull it back, and everything has been kind of where I've wanted it to sit, and it felt great. So that's been a huge blessing to be able to get the impact that I've always kind of wanted, but without having to fear the old ladies at the end of the night.
Yeah. Brian, for you guys, what has been your experience with SPL levels and things like that?
Yeah, it's been interesting because, like everyone else has sort of already touched on, with older systems, as you push them to get more impact, the negatives start to outweigh the benefit of that impact. And so, our system was very much in that camp. And so because of that, we were used to mixing a little bit lower, just because it would get pretty aggressive pretty fast, especially on the top end. And so one of the interesting things now is, you can look at the dB meter and sort of figure out, what it says that you're doing. But the question that keeps coming up is, but does it sound bad? No, it sounds great. It sounds full and rich. And even if it's pushing past, the levels we used to go at a little bit, it's so transparent and clean that it's not offensive to anybody, and it translates throughout the entire room for us that way, which is a really great benefit. And so, especially on the low end now, we can push that a bit harder than we have in the past. But then on the flip side, it allows us to be very dynamic, and so we've got this transparency and headroom with the system, and because of the width, we can have really intimate moments with both music and speech. But then we can get really impactful. And so we're not fatiguing people's ears over time with just this onslaught of sound the whole time. So we go from, worship that's great and impactful as needed based on the song. And then when it comes down to the message from the lead pastor, it's remarkably intimate. But the amazing thing is, in a 1,500 seat room, no one's stretching or struggling to hear him. And they're all hearing him like straight on center, even with the outfills. And so it's pretty cool. And it's kind of hard to get your head to wrap around it, to be honest. I still struggle with it because, having spent years trying to come up with cheats and workarounds for the left-right limitations of how do you get a wide sound, how do you get a big sound, how do you, all these things and different workflows for that. The L-ISA just kind of throws it all on its head, and kind of forces you to go back to, hey, but everything can be coming from its source, its visual source, if you wanted to. And because the system is so transparent left to right through the width of all those scenes, it's remarkably clean, and imaging is amazing. And, we've just been super stoked.
Josh, I would like to talk about the low end to touch on Brian's point. One thing that we were benefit with is I never believed in flown subs. That was just, in all the venues that I had been in a part of, and it just never worked out. And when I tested it in my room, where we have a balcony and we have 4 flown subs part of our system, and the remarkable impact we get on the low end is tremendous. When engineers come by and ask me, well, I don't tell them anything about the subs. I say, hey, man, come listen to this, hear this. What do you think? I was like, and then I asked him, how many subs do you think we have in this room? You got 12, at least 12 double 18s. And they're blown away by the time I tell them, hey, it's just 4 flown subs at the top. And they're like, are you serious? I'm like, no, it's just 4 flown subs, but you explained it best. When you centralize all the low end to the center of the room, you get that equal impact. And, you hear it at the bottom of the balcony, at the top of the balcony, it's even across the board. And that was a huge factor to our win over the DB level, was like, I'm able to get it even across the board without the front getting super exposed and the back not feeling anything.
Right.
That's one of the biggest wins.
And that's a huge point of complaint. I think, we get complaints as being front of house engineers, tech directors and stuff for churches. We get complaints from the congregation, and normally it was too loud. It wasn't, rarely is it wasn't loud enough, right? It's either it was too loud, but the it was too loud is oftentimes more of a perception thing. It was a lack of low end in this scenario, which made the high frequency seem more piercing, right? Or in this over here, they have too much low end. And so and we don't have the time to get real deep into why L-ISA allows for such a natural irradiation of low frequency energy. But suffice it to say, and you guys have experienced this, that because of where we place a kick drum or bass and where the subs are and where all of that, we have a much more homogeneous output of low frequency that is much more natural throughout the room. We don't end up with these big anti-nodes and nodes and things like that. Obviously, room acoustics play into this some, but from the physical deployment of the system, it's the most homogeneous way for us to deploy or emit low frequency energy. So I think, one of the things I'd like to know from each of you guys is maybe most importantly, how has the system been received by leadership? Because for all 3 of you, there is a certain amount of risk going to your bosses and saying, I want to go with a new technology. Josh sold me on this, right? L-Acoustics has sold me on this. But you guys are the ones who have to live with it. And you're the ones who ultimately long-term are responsible for that decision. So, how has it been received from, lead pastors, elderships, boards, things like that? for you guys?
Things have been very well received. I have yet to, there was a large elder committee that was a part of our 2.5-year project. And, about a year ago, I said, hey, like to pivot the sound system all of a sudden, hey, we've had this system already designed, and I just saw this and explained why. And, you hope to explain, I would say, what something that is, until you experience it, is kind of almost unexplainable. So once, we had the opening services, we've had, our first month's worth of services. Everybody who I reported to, elders and leadership of the projects, have been blown away. They said everything was exactly how you said, or that's everything how L-Acoustics said. And, thankful that you had the courage to make the pivot. And we're really couldn't be happier with how it turned out.
Yeah, my pastor's a musician as well. So I think I had the trickiest job here because, I could buy him over. He's looking at brand new pedals. He's an electric guitar player. So he understands the drive to get better and all these sounds. But when it came time to, we're taking a risk with going immersive. What if this doesn't work out? What everybody else is doing left, right. This is a huge step we're taking. And I had personally gone to hear the system up in North Carolina, and I was blown away. And that's what gave me the security of, I'm walking firmly into this knowing that I'm backed up by a company that's incredible. First of all, they're one of the best speakers in the world. And then now I've heard it for myself and I've experienced it. So now I can explain it to the leadership on what they're to expect without the technical terms. When you go into a room, when you go to any theater, and the way you listen to an orchestra is the way you're going to see the orchestra. That explanation really won it for me because it really brought it down to their terms of their understanding. And it was received incredibly. When we did the demo, Pastor walked in, he was blown away on the response. He said, we sound like a brand new church. I mean, this is completely different. Like, I wasn't expecting this. I was expecting something good, but this was incredibly different. And once I showed him all the controls and everything that we're able to do, he said, wow, this is incredible. Now we're going to run with this and we're going to create experiences. And we got really creative with our planning now. Now we're talking about moments and energy, and we talking about all these other factors that we're not once really interested in. Where can we create a worship moment? Where can we drop the band off and create this massive vocal chamber to where now the congregation has both hands up. Everybody in the room has both hands up and are immersed in worship. That's a lot of things that a lot of people don't talk about, that happens live in church. When I see the room with both hands up, that's why I'm here. We're here to create a worship experience. And now that we've been given the tools at hand to be able to do this, it's been tremendous.
It's funny when you mentioned it was one of your pastors, I think, after we did the first sound check, it was quiet, and he was standing at the balcony edge up in the air, and he just starts like slow clapping. And he's like, this has traditionally been like one of the worst spots in the entire room. And he's like, this is just incredible.
He was in tears. He was blown away. He couldn't understand how, we were doing this. It is incredible.
Brian, for you guys, how has, I know we've had some conversations together. We've talked, I've had the ability to speak with a couple of the pastors from your church, but, since I've been there, how has it been received by leadership?
Yeah, it's been, I'll be honest, it was a little cautious at first, just because it's so different. And again, we hadn't heard anything for so long. And so one of the really interesting things about that is I'll sort of ask different people in leadership or husbands, wives, et cetera, people on staff, hey, so what do you think? As I'm sort of walking the room back and forth and kind of getting a sense of what it feels like and sounds like in the room. And I get the same response from a lot of them, which is, it sounds different.
Yeah. And
so then my follow-up is, but does it sound that like, can you hear, in this case, like if it's spoken word, does it sound like Patrick, our lead pastor, is speaking from the center of the stage? And we're so trained, and our other campuses have traditional left-right rigs. And so they're used to sort of that wall of sound, that reinforcement. And so they'll stop for a second and they'll sort of focus and pay attention to that question of, but can you hear him well? Do you hear everything he's saying? Does it sound like he's speaking to you from the stage, not from a PA, not from a reinforcement standpoint? And it's like a light bulb goes off all of a sudden. And they like respond pretty much equally. Oh my gosh, yes. Like it's such a remarkable difference in the way they perceive it and hear it that at first for some of them it's kind of off-putting because it's not what they're used to hearing or have been hearing. But when they actually, think about it for a second or sort of get immersed in it, for lack of a better word, the reality of what it's doing and what's happening behind the scenes with the system and processing and everything, all of that's going on to bring in something so intimate, or on the flip side, our kind of big weekend before Christmas services, we did Little Drummer Boy for King Country cover of it. And we typically have smaller vocal groups, 2-3 people at the most. And so we had two guys left and right of the downstage edge a bit, and a bunch of drums and stuff going on. And Josh, you were actually mixing it, and it was really cool because suddenly we had these two guys both represented from their positions in a very forward, almost kind of aggressive sound. But it didn't feel aggressive and it didn't feel forward. It felt really right to the song. And the transparency and clarity for everybody in that, everyone walked away like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. This sounds so great. Or, that was really awesome. And so any of that initial concern, just because it's something new, it's a new technology and we had never demoed it. Yeah. We had just demoed a traditional, left, right kind of rig. And so, the response has been really positive, which is great, and we're really looking forward to taking advantage of it more.
So, you guys have all, and I think you've all kind of told me in one way or another the answer to this question, but I'm going to pose it to you specifically and kind of tell you from my aspect. What I'd like to know from each of you is, what do you think the most impressive thing about L-ISA has been for you? And I'll tell you from my standpoint, and hopefully I don't ruin your answer, but if I do, you can just echo this. But for me, time and again, having been able to mix on systems, be part of these grand openings, be part of events like SALT and things like that are being mixed in L-ISA, to me, that one of the most impressive things has been how the technology disappears. And I have this soapbox when I talk at different things about that if something doesn't have a ministry purpose, it doesn't have a reason to be on stage for us. Strobe lights are cool, but if it doesn't support the end goal for the ministry, whether that be for a given effect or something, then it doesn't really have a place. And what I feel like with L-ISA systems time and again is that you're not wowed and amazed by the technology. You're just immersed. Again, we'll say that word, but you're connected to the stage like you've never been before, because it feels like everything is just happening from stage exactly how it should be, just louder. It doesn't feel amplified. And it's hard because people want to go to an L-ISA system and they expect a gimmick. They expect something to move back and forth, right? And that kind of thing. And like, oh, wow, that was so cool. But in all reality, I think from a ministry standpoint, if we have done something with technology that made the technology disappear, I think we've done exactly what our entire job is. For serving our ministry. But John, why don't we start with you? What has been the most impressive part about L-ISA for you?
My word that I've used, because it was the word that was drilled in our head from our goals of the project, was just focus. So again, back to pastor speaking on stage, it feels like he's right there front and center where he's standing. I would say another example is in our Christmas program, we had a vocalist that was off stage left pretty far, but then we had a bunch of kids acting out, the Christmas story stage right. What was wonderful about that is, we could have, again, it was like everything was coming from stage, but just louder. The girl that was singing, she was, off to our right. And then the angel, when she spoke, the 6-year-old, she was, stage right. And those happened inside the same, moments apart from each other inside the song. And everything just was where it was. And it was wonderful to be able to present that in that way. and it added to the impacts of those moments because things were congruent with how you saw them.
Brian, how about you guys?
Yeah, I think I would use the word intimate. It was the goal initially to try and achieve that connection between spoken word and help the PA disappear. And that has been 100% achieved. And so for us, the biggest takeaway was the reality of actually seeing that happen in a way that was unexpected, even more so. I mean, I mentioned it before, I expected it to be for the seats that were inside of that immersive zone, that L-ISA zone, but to experience it almost in the entire, width of the room, even with the outfills and everything, that's just been really amazing and kind of transformational in a way, because I'm excited to see where it goes in the future as people get used to hearing the system and sort of learning that this is the normal sound now. They're going to be hearing the normal representation, where the PA is not over as this driving factor, that's not in the way of what's happening with worship, and lets us get, David sort of mentioned it, get more creative about how we do things and where we place things and the connection between placement and the audible of what that is. But really to be able to create space in the mix where people's visual representation and their oral, hearing of that matches in a way, and to be able to do that in an intimate way, where a big room can feel small and where people can be connected and drawn in, whether it's through worship or through a message, that to me has been the biggest win for us.
Yeah, I echo Brian's point as well. The intimate, with the current regulations, I mean, we're maxed out at a room, 850 to 1,000 people. And, our biggest worry is how do you make this massive auditorium feel close enough to where there's no disconnect? And that's the biggest factor, is when I'm sliding the timing or the distance off of, the vocal praise team, and I'm bringing it in and I see people's hands go up. That's just a winning factor for me. I'm able to hone down on it. And then when we sing this chorus, we create this massive moment within a half empty room, with not that capacity. It's just been the game changer for our ministry as a whole.
That's awesome. Well, guys, lots of information that we've been able to get out there. I wanted to give people the ability to know how to get a hold of you guys if they want to know more from you guys directly about the installations, about the technology, if they want to talk to you instead of me, to get some more firsthand accounts. We will provide some contact info for you guys, so people can get a hold of you. If you have any social media handles, we'll also put those out there so people can get a hold of you guys directly to kind of follow you, get to know more about what you guys are doing in your ministries, as well as, if they have questions for you. Are there any closing thoughts that you guys have, both about, L-ISA, the technology, and what it's done for you guys?
No, I just want to say thank you, Josh. Thanks for leading the way in this and your involvement with everything. Couldn't have done it without you, and very thankful for you. Cool.
Well, yeah, guys, thank you. I think for each one of you, you guys took a risk in a new technology, in L-Acoustics and me. And I'm so excited to know what God's going to be doing in your ministries moving forward from here with this tool, amongst, the leadership that you guys are providing, your volunteer teams and your staff, and just the vision that your churches each have for where they're going and how L-ISA and L-Acoustics has been able to fit in that. So thank you so much for your time here. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your time with us and our NAM crew here. And we look forward to talking to all of you guys again soon.